Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Inside the Creator's Mind. I'm Taylor, the creator of Legion's Realms at War TCG, and thanks for jumping back to watch another episode. We're on to episode 7, and today we're going to be diving into something a little bit different this time around. Up to this point, we've been talking about the variations of what it takes from the creator to get to a certain point, to get to designing a game, and a little bit more of the nuances behind that. But today we're going to do a topic here of how to design a good starter product. Now, this is pivotal. Those that have followed Legions up to this point know that I've been designing and building this game for the past decade. And 10 years is a long time. And you would think, why so long? Some other games can do it in a year. Some games can do it in 2 years, 3 years. Why 10? And quite simply, as I've talked about before in previous episode about the importance of lore, the importance of a storyline, the importance of characters within that storyline, and how to use those to not only launch the game, but to continue the further development of products throughout your game. But what we didn't talk about yet was how to design a good starter product. And the reason why I think this is so vital and so important is plain and simple, it's the gateway into your game. It's how you get people started. You know, it's what they're first going to be introduced to, and it's going to be their first impression on your game. Now, I think there's a couple aspects to designing a good starter product with the product itself. I think that just launching with a couple decks isn't creating a good starter product. I feel as though that's not giving someone or the consumer, the player, ultimately your potential fan base, it's not giving them enough. I don't think it's giving them the full rounded game. So kind of the approach that we took, and part of the reason why it took so long with Legion specifically, was that we wanted to create a starter product that not only encapsulated the integral functionalities and mechanics of the game, obviously to get people jump right away and learn right from the basics, but also I think what kind of gets missed in some other starter products, and I've tried a lot of games and I've played a lot of games, and new player and veteran, and how do they go about bringing someone in? We've talked about in previous episodes about that hook. How do you get people in? How do you get them integrated into your game? How do you get them excited? How do you get them coming back? What's going to get them to play another time? And I think it comes down to the starter products. And I'm not talking about just the decks. I'm talking about how you present the game, how it is represented to the player for the first time. And I really, really believe that starter products are not just decks or pre-constructed, put together faction or legion or archetype or hero or whatever. I believe it is how you launch your company, how you launch your game, and how you launch the brand, the feel that your game wants to come across. And that's why I think it took us so long with Legions, because we not only launched the starter decks, or what we call our 2-player battle decks, but we also launched Ravaged Lands, our alpha set that consisted of 260 cards at the same time. And that's where I think some games in the past have done excellent at, and that's where we learn from that. You know, we talked about on the previous episode, does the learning ever stop? And that is something that I learned that succeeded with other games, was launching a starter product that people could really sink their teeth into. You know, decks are one thing. You can get people to sit down and play it and try it out. But if that's all they get is just an appetizer and they don't get a main course, well, what's going to keep them sticking around and waiting for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, a year for your first product to release? So I think that a lot of thought and a lot of effort needs to be put in right up front, because we talked about making that first impression, what's going to hook a player in. So I don't think when you talk about designing a starter product, you're just talking about decks. I think you're talking about the start of your game. How do you launch? What are the foundations that you're laying down, and how you put your best foot forward? So with that, I talk about designing a good starter product. What we did is, instead of doing a singular deck, since Legions has 8 Legions to play as, I think having 8 deck selection would be pretty daunting, not only for the game store to have appropriate shelf space and getting them to commit to something like that on a new game, but also just as a player walking in, and people like selection, but they don't like to have too many options, because it's like looking like an artist when you look at a blank canvas. We talked about, I think, this before as well, is that if you give people parameters instead of just something blank and say paint, if you give them parameters, if you give them a box to work with, some restrictions, then it allows them to get more creative and allows them to accelerate that creation process. And realistically, when you buy a pre-constructed deck, yes, that is the company laying out to you, the game creator laying out to you, the baseline and the functionality of the deck, so you can learn not only the mechanics of the game as a whole, but as that faction or as that legion or whatever that type that you chose, and how it plays within the dynamics of the game at large. So what we wanted to do was tie that in and give people a little more restriction, a little more confinement, and launch and make that breed creativity. So another aspect of the reason why we didn't go with 8 and we went with 4 2-player battle decks that featured 8 legions is that when you put legions warring head to head, it helps with a lot of things. It helps with that lore, that storyline, that driving nature, the creative aspect of your game. Because when people look at it and they see Undead versus Titan, why is that the 2 that are paired? When they look at Dwarf against Mythical Beast, why are those 2 the ones that are paired in this battle deck? What is their story? Why are they at war? Right? So what we wanted to do was not only to encapsulate 2 decks in one, so it's a little less daunting. We also wanted it to be to get people asking questions, get those creative juices flowing, get them more immersed into it. Like, not just, oh cool, we have a game to pick up and play, but why did they do it like this? When you get people start asking questions, we go into that aspect of doesn't ever stop learning, is the fact that the more they learn, the more they trust you, the more they want to get involved, the more they want to be part of the community, the more product they consume, the better the game becomes. So it's a thing that's going to get them started right away, and coming down to that first impression again, right? So then when you wind it back and look at what we did with our 2-player battle decks again, is that not only did we pair 2 legions, but 2 warring legions against each other, but we also included 2 booster packs. And that's what the key part of having a set launching with it, is that you can then include some booster packs from that set, like we did with Ravaged Lands, to not only give people the bare bones and that appetizer we were talking about with the decks, but also it lets them sink their teeth into that little bit of that main course, because now they get to not only open their decks, try them out, and learn from there, but they also have access to like a booster pack or 2 booster packs to customize their deck further. Then on top of that, what we did is we have, because it's 2 decks, and it makes it less daunting selection wise, but also it's really inviting when ultimately you play a TCG, you need someone to play against, right? So when you pair 2 together, it's a no-brainer. You buy 1 2-player battle deck, you have 2 decks you can immediately play with a friend. Or if you go into a game store with your buddy and you're figuring out what you want to purchase or what you want to try or whatever, you look at it as like, okay, that's a really good price for gives you 2 decks and 2 booster packs. I'm going to try that out because my friend and I can go 50-50 on it. At the end of the day, we're spending what, $10, maybe $12 each. We both get a deck, we both get a booster pack right away, and you're playing the game at its full capacity right out of the gate. And that is what you need. You need to be able to display the game in its base core and its mechanics. You need to be able to be inviting. You have to give them selection, but not too much selection. You have to allow them to be creative and continue to add to their deck, hence the booster packs and the packs. But also, you have to give them, leaving them wanting more. Whether that's more answers about the storyline or the reasons why you chose to pair those legions against each other, or leave them wanting more because maybe they open something cool in their pack and they're like, you know what, that was Ravaged Lands, oh, that's the booster box, maybe I'll get that as well. And ultimately that jumps the player right into the start of the game. That gets the player right involved and engrossed in it. Maybe a friend as well, because you split the 2-player battle deck. Maybe you split a booster box as well, so it not only maybe netted 1 player, it netted 2, right? It also immediately makes a churn on product for the game store that is invested in bringing this product and storing it on the shelves in a valuable shelf space. Not only that is so they can be able to move a product right away, but then if that happens compoundedly, then the game store then turns around and has to order from the company again, right? And so then it helps the company because they are ordering more products, so more products moving for us, but also moving for them, and therefore getting to the player at the end of the line and getting them more and more engrossed into the product and into the game. So having that starter product as an excellent gateway, that is the challenge, right? So you have to be able to hit and check all of those boxes. And that's how we wanted to approach Legions with their 2-player battle decks, right? Having it cost efficient, having it not take up crazy amount of shelf space for a store that's in high demand, making sure that it was inclusive for not just 1 but 2 players, making it have resale ability or collectability in it, given the fact that we created an artist pseudo reserve list in our 2-player battle decks, because the art that appears in them will never appear again in the game, so that adds an element of collectability, as well as a long-term collectability of the fact that those decks have 2 booster packs from Ravaged Lands that only saw a first edition print run, so then it adds another layer of collectability in for people who want to collect it or keep it sealed. So it checks these boxes that gets the player involved, gets the game store on board, gets the player hooked, adds an additional player if they got their friend involved, keeps collectability over the long term, right? So there's a lot involved in just making a starter product. It's not as simple as let's just make a deck, let's get as many people to play it as possible, right? There's a lot of just like everything else we talk about in this series, there's a lot more in depth to each decision. Every decision is critical when you're putting your livelihood and all of your money and everything into your dream. You got to be able to think critically. You got to think 4 or 5 moves ahead and think about how it's going to not only affect you right away, how it's going to affect you in the midterm, and how it could potentially affect you in the long term. Just like in any business, you have to make educated decisions that are going to help your business, right? And you have to make educated decisions that are going to help grow your business. And in this case, netting more game stores on board that can trust the fact that your product will move because it has long-term sustainability, it has long-term collectability, it's not going to be a dead product on shelves like a lot of starter products or other games are, and it's not just going to immediately get outdated. Then the task is on us as a developer, as we produce more sets, to make sure that the starter deck cards always remain viable. And this is easier for us to do given the fact that we are an eternal format and not a rotational game, that we can always do a throwback nod to some of those battle deck cards and circle them back into relevancy if they ever fell out of it. So There's a lot of thought process that goes into designing a 2-player battle deck, or it's a lot of thought process in just going into designing an actual starter set or starting a product as it is. So that's how when you look at it, when you really try and break it down, how to design a good starter product, it's got to be a gateway, but it's got to be more than that. It's got to be a gateway that gets them involved, that they have collectability, that they feel ownership of, that they feel that they can make something that's theirs, and they get a sense of involvement, a sense of community, a sense of wonder that they keep asking more questions. Why the decision of these ratios? Why are the artwork like this? Why is there this character fighting against this character? What is the story more? Right? You get a lot of these questions, but questions lead to more answers, and it creates this trip down a rabbit hole that you want to get people engrossed into your product and into your game. So it's layers upon layers, like a lot of things we talk about in this series. And once again, we only scratch the surface. So this coming to the conclusion of this topic for now, we will obviously circle back around to it again. We have done that. We've mentioned that before, and this is going to be a long series. So thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for listening, as always. And this was the newest episode of Inside the Creator's Mind. And if you come back tomorrow, there'll be another one we'll talk about. So until next time, guys, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next one.